First, though, I want to take you to the United States, where there's been a big development. Joe Biden has clinched the 2024 Democratic presidential nomination. Donald Trump is poised for the Republican nomination, with 4 states holding primaries today. CNN reporter Kristen Holmes joins us live from Freedom Plaza in Washington. I guess we did expect this, Kristen, but this now formal that the nominee for the Democratic Party will be the incumbent, Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's right. He just crossed over the threshold, which was 1,968 delegates. On the other side, we have Donald Trump, who is currently at 1,089 delegates. He needs 1,215 to cross over that threshold and become the nominee. But as you noted, everyone expected this to happen, and not only that, but both of them have been effectively operating as the presumptive nominee for several weeks. Even before Nikki Haley dropped out of the Republican race, Donald Trump was already looking ahead to this general election rematch with President Joe Biden. And it shouldn't be understated that we are in a moment of history here. This has not happened for decades and decades in which you see this kind of presidential rematch. Also, Donald Trump himself, if he were to win the presidency this time around, would be one of only 2 people, I believe, 2 or 3, to ever serve non-consecutive terms. So there's a lot of history being made here. But the other part of this is, while that is historical, it also appears to be a rematch that most Americans do not want. Polling in America shows that most people don't want either of them as their candidates. They think that they're too old. They're looking for alternatives. We saw that there were a lot of Republicans seeking alternatives to Donald Trump, but none of them could actually break through when it came to getting that nomination.
That is just extraordinary, that situation, that the 2 major political organisations end up with 2 individuals, as you rightly point out, that have a massive question mark over them, including from some of their own traditional supporters. Now, Biden and Trump will closely be watching votes from Georgia. Why is that?
Well, tonight's the primary in Georgia, so it could tell you some things about the general election. But let's just talk about what we know about Georgia overall, which is that in 2016, Donald Trump won by a very big margin, and he lost by roughly 11,000 votes in 2020. That is a very small margin. Both teams, Biden and Trump's team, believe that Georgia is critical to seal their fate going to the White House in November. And so they are both trying to pick away at that state. We saw both of them there on Saturday. A big part of that is going to be trying to court black voters. Now, as you mentioned, as both of them are facing problems or headwinds from members of their own party and traditional voting blocs, and that includes black voters for Democrats. And Donald Trump does see an opening there, particularly in the state of Georgia, particularly with black men, that they believe they can siphon off some of those voters. And it's not just Georgia. It's actually in a few of these battleground states, Michigan as well, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. These are states in which Donald Trump is likely to not do well with independent or suburban voters, but they think they can offset that by chipping away at some of these black voters. Now, the other part of this is when you talk about these candidates being disenfranchised by their own voting blocs, one of the other strategies that you're going to see from Donald Trump is really just depressing the Democratic vote. It doesn't necessarily mean switching people over to vote for him, but really trying to push this message that Biden's doing nothing for you and that there's no enthusiasm behind him, so that people don't show up and vote in November. Because the one thing you do have to remember when it comes to Donald Trump is that he will always have his base. His base will always just show up to vote. We've seen it in the primary season, and we've seen it time and time again. He has a lot of enthusiasm among the people who do want to vote for him. Now, that's not a majority of the country. That's why they have to keep siphoning away at these different voting blocs. But there is a base that will show up. Joe Biden is going to have to work harder for that base because there's just a lower level of enthusiasm when it comes to the Democratic president.